Well, thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Dominique, and to the whole team for inviting us. This is a little bit different from the other presentations, but we did want to present you two different presentations. Actually, the first one is about a larger project, wouldn't even be the right name for it. It's more sort of a program of research, which we call RuBase. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll give a specific example of how we've applied some of the stuff from RuBase to the case of Russian coercion towards Ukraine over the past decade. It's really all about this evidence base that we talked about before and how we can get it better, at least than it used to be. I mean, I often show this slide, Russia's back, there he is, and he says that he's willing to use all means necessary to acquire what he wants. And then on our side, the Western Russia specialist side, this is what it mostly looked like. People my age, with my stomach, with my gray hair, still pretty much doing what we did 25 years ago. I mean, frankly, I started my career as a Soviet specialist. So I was at the RAND Corporation at UCLA. And in those days, we didn't have any of the tools that we had available now. And so after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I've worked for think tanks for most of my life. And the work of think tanks reflects the priorities of our governments. And so for most of my career, I've been doing then defense work, which has become much more quantitative, of course. And so then after 2014, our governments wake up again to the fact that Russia's back. And so, I re-entered the field, and it's pretty much the same people doing the same type of research with the same type of tools, despite the fact that the world has really transformed revolutionarily out there. I talk about three different modes of doing research. We still very much are in the mode what we call 1.0, which is the prima donna. Maya Plisetskaya here on the thing. It's these experts who have devoted their life to a certain topic. They've become almost the gurus of their particular field. You have to listen to them. They have their own priors. They know a lot about the topics that they work on. But of course, they also have a lot of, in their growing up, they've sort of tend to have their priors, their ideologies, their beliefs, their ideological predilections, their theoretical predilections. So you definitely want to listen to them, but you don't want to listen to just one of them. You want to try to bring them together, have discussions, have focus groups, have conferences where different people from different parts come together to exchange views, often not very elegantly, right? I mean, I think it's great that Danyliw, actually, this seminar, really tries to have more interaction than most seminars, but it's still very dissatisfying. So that's why we are sort of pushing for 3.0, which is a bit like Web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, right? So the idea is most of these experts write. The progress that has been made in natural language processing and natural language understanding over the past even just 2 years has been so phenomenal, as you all know from your mobile phones. When you do a search query, the quality is much better. So how could we use some of these new tools to collect not only the textual data, but also the more numerical data, and try to see if it can help us in our stories, irrespective of whether we think of ourselves as qualitative or quantitative people. How can we get more evidence than we've had? So data comes in all sorts of different forms. In our project, we focus primarily on numbers and text. I think it's great that others also focus on video. That's just sort of a step too far for us right now. Data themselves don't say anything. You want to put them into a certain context, you want to organize them, you want to validate them when they become information. Ultimately, you hope it leads to a level of knowledge. By the way, this is a graph from the real IR, international relations. People think that IR stands for international relations. The much bigger field, of course, of information retrieval, which is what this is from. But so the knowledge layer is what we often have now. Because of our almost unbearable lightness of the data that we have and the information that we've extracted from that, we have to base decisions on knowledge, mostly by these prima donnas, mostly working on themselves. And Khrystyna will show you some evidence of how that's the case in our field. So we've constructed this program which we call RuBase. Ru stands, of course, for Russia, and base has a dual meaning. It's base in the sense of a knowledge base. How can we bring together all of the evidence that's out there, text evidence and data evidence, bring it together in a data warehouse and offer it to our colleagues to be able to use with them? And that becomes a second meaning of the word base. Base as a foundation for new forms of collaboration. We have been a particularly uncollaborative bunch. I mean, you'll see some of the evidence afterwards. How can we improve that? So what you see here is the base. You sometimes think it's like a foundation of a house. It's static. Our base is sort of much more dynamic. It constantly ingests new data, both text and other elements. We make knowledge graphs, so we're increasingly starting to make knowledge graphs out of those kind of things. And then we can still write our articles in our books, but we can increasingly also move to the right, to a sort of interactive visualizations, where we can start exploring what we know about what happened. For instance, let's take your case, for instance, right? Imagine that we could create a real ontology where the actors can be coded, where the validity of the agency of certain actors can be tested by a variety of different sources. And then we can do all sorts of different things with that. So there are three main lines of development. The first is about text. Incidentally, this work is funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, $700,000 for 2 years, and we just got $2 million from the Pentagon, from the Minerva Research Initiative for the next 3 years. So we're going to be doing serious work on this for the next 3 years. And we're doing it together with Georgia Tech, the US-based university. And so their university library has incredible coverage of almost all academic sources that are out there. We're doing quite a bit of bibliometric work, which is a very low-hanging fruit for most researchers. Khrystyna will show you some examples of that as well. On the Russian side, we have bought access to Eastview Press, which is a US-based aggregator. Unfortunately, there's no equivalent for Ukraine. It would be great to have one. But this is really nice because it has really very good coverage for both central newspapers, regional newspapers, official publications, press statements, academic journals from across Russia. And so what we do is we use various search query algorithms. How do we find the right types of documents that we're looking for? And that we put a lot of time in this. A typical search query is sometimes 5 words or so. We have a search query that takes about 2 pages, where we try to identify what is Russian agency. You could just look for Russia, but you'll miss a lot of elements of Russian agency that, in our particular area we want to look for. So the actor, who's Russia? What the project about coercion? What kind of elements, verbs, nouns would you look for if you want to create a corpus about coercion? How do we focus on international coercion? Because we are not interested in Northern Caucasus or in domestic coercion, of which there's a lot of Russia, of course. We're really interested in international coercion. So out of this, we create a number of different text corpora, which can consist out of a few hundreds to multiple thousands of documents, which we then start coding. So we're trying to extract an ontology out of a document. And there are some new programs out there that allow you to do that. So if you code about 100 documents, and you say, this is an agent of Russia, and you have a corpus of 10,000 documents, the program, which is called Prodigy, for instance, will try to look for similar context and ask you, is this guy a Russian agent? And then you as an expert say yes, no, yes, no. And in like an hour or two of additional coding, you can actually you can create a model that will help you in identifying these kinds of things. And so that allows you to do all sorts of visualizations out of that. These are some of the corpora that we have now. So you see, for instance, for coercion, we have both in English and in Russian. It's probably not exhaustive, but it's much more than the typical 35 average bibliographical references that people have in their papers. And how do you know when you quote, right, that you really covered the entire field? You couldn't do this 5 years ago. You can now. There's a fantastic new database called lens.org, which anybody can use. It's freely available. It's much bigger than Google Scholar or Web of Science or Scopus. All right, on the data side, we've collected all the data sets that have relevant information about Russian international coercion. We've put them together in a data warehouse. We also have some Russia-specific ones, and this goes from public opinion surveys to elite surveys to economic data to open data from the Russian government as a whole. We tried to put all of this together in a data warehouse. And then finally, we're building some knowledge graphs. We don't have much time, and I want to leave enough time for Khrystyna, so I'll skip over that. But the knowledge graphs are sort of the new technology that the Googles and the Facebooks and the Baidus and Tencents of this world are using to extract knowledge from the academic literature. It's almost a shame. I mean, knowledge building used to take place in academia. These big companies have now used modern technologies to do this for the entire field of knowledge. Microsoft Academic, you may know, Google Scholar, you may know, and from that, they're starting to create these knowledge graphs, and we scholars are barely even aware of these things that are occurring. I think we still have an advantage over the Googles because Google wants to do the whole world, and we are just interested in Ukraine or in Russia or in other things. But we have to do this work, and it's not being done very much quite yet. All right, the final slide I want to show you is that this is really constructed as an open project. So we have a core which consists of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, where I work, a small Dutch think tank. But most of our team is based in Ukraine. So Khrystyna has a new entity within the Kiev School of Economics, which we call StratBase, which is doing most of the work for this particular thing. This combines two great strengths of Ukraine. It's data science specialties, which certain parts of Ukraine are really quite good at, and Ukrainians don't like hearing that they still know Russia better than we do. And in fact, I think Ukrainian knowledge about Russia is, not as great as it's sometimes made out to be. But it's still much better than ours. Our knowledge in Western Europe of Russia is dismal. Knowledge in the United States, of course, much worse still. So there is still a comparative advantage that Ukrainians have in helping us Westerners to try to make sense of this country. Around us, we're looking for students who are willing to learn these things. So we have meticulously documented all these data sets. How do you use them? Where do you find them? Where do you search? What kind of search queries can you do? We cannot make the corpora available because they're, of course, copyrighted. But the entire process that will lead you if you want to create your own corpora, is documented. So if you're interested in this, come and see us afterwards. We'll give you access to all these things, because that's what we got money for from Carnegie to do this. Then we have a soundboard group with some more senior Russian experts. Ponars, the program on new approaches to Russian security, plays a big role in that. And finally, we have a broader ecosystem where we're trying to incentivize people to at least share their PowerPoints. Like people who teach, like, you know, Russian foreign policy, there's hundreds of them. And we don't even share our PowerPoints. So there's so much low-hanging fruit in which we could collaborate more. Anyway, that's a bit of the background, and Khrystyna will now show you some examples. Mind you, we only got accepted to the conference how many weeks ago? 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago? Okay, so we didn't have very much time, so the paper is not fully finished yet.
The word is not accepted. It was possible to invite you.
Okay. Look, whatever you want to put it. But so some of these slides that Khrystyna will show you, we're still double-checking, but it's already quite impressive presentation, I would submit.